Okay, for people who are joining this live stream, I am for once not sharing my screen because I am out walking, and I'll be back at my screen soon, but we started anyway. Okay, our subject today is qualifiers for entities. And so we have qualifiers like dated, for example, that are a way of restricting the kind of qualifying an entity, and we have had an idea to generalize that. So can somebody summarize where we're at in terms of, so this qualified thing that you've got written down here, is that something that's implemented, or is this a proposal?
Yes, it's implemented. So the entity version has been implemented for a few years now, and that's what dated is based on, and support in Wiki data is now implemented too.
It is not yet obviously a documented function.
Okay. Okay, so then qualified, what is the language of how you can qualify things?
Are you referring to the definition, for instance? So here's, for instance, a proposal of what it means to qualify an object. Yeah.
Okay, so is the qualification, when we think about entity queries, right? We have this entity, and then this value of this property is defining from a set of entities, which entity do we want to talk about, right? So that's one, but this is a different thing. This is within an entity. This is a subcase of that entity. Is that right?
It is rather.
Am I making sense?
It is rather choosing which qualifiers do you want to apply to the properties once you extract some data. For instance, the entity with its qualifier doesn't do anything yet. Only once you extract, for instance, the area of a historic country, that changes by date. And there might be other properties that don't change depending on the date.
Hello.
Yeah.
What we're doing here is we're attaching a qualifier to the entity for the sake of saying when you are propertified, when we ask for a property, this qualifier should be transferred to the entity property value system to determine the correct piece, the correct instance of the property to use. Is that correct?
Yes.
I think that's probably complementary in the sense of one can either say the property is qualified or the entity is qualified. Like GDP, is it really a flavor of a GDP? Is it really a property of the entity, the country, or is it rather a qualification of the property? I feel like
no, I agree. So the qualified wrapper should work both for the entity and for the property, correct?
Yes. So that works both for entities or Wikidata. For instance, here's an example where first we say the entity we want to qualify it to say in order to be of the form solid. Yeah? And that one is applied to one of the properties. But then the other property, we additional qualify, we say we want all the temperatures. Yeah? That means we can mix and match, qualify the entity and the property, and there's a hierarchy of which takes precedent in case of conflict.
And when it returns a data structure which has multiple things in it, what is the, so is it like entity? What is the outer layer of the array that's returned? Is the outer layer the entity, or the outer layer? That's probably makes the most sense, right? If you're returning multiple entities or multiple instances of an entity and then multiple instances of a property, there's a question of which way around do you nest it? You get what I'm saying? Did that make sense?
I'm not sure. I fully understand. But
okay, so look, if we ended up with, if there was an alloy there first, okay,
yeah.
And that alloy, and we for that alloy, it had different, percentages of aluminum or something, right? Yeah. So which are not different entities, but are somehow qualifying the properties. Then we ask for. Then we have another wrapper around its property saying, give me all temperatures. What I'm saying is, which order does that go in?
That's arbitrary because in the end, it all applies to the property values.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying when you return the results, right, it's got to be nested. It's got to be a list. There's a nested list, right? Because it's going to be a nested list for the entity qualifier and for the property qualifier. And I'm just trying to clarify which, go ahead.
So first of all, there are two types of qualifiers. Ones that are categorical, that means you pick either solid or liquid, or range qualifiers like all or between that and that say, give me a sample, like a table specification.
Yes.
And then you get back for the qualifiers that for which you want a range. You get all of those.
I understand, but what about an interpolating function? Could you ever get an interpolating function?
Yes. So that is additional information that you put on top of it. For instance, if you say date goes to all, you're saying you probably want a time series, which is some qualified values with the interpretation that you can interpolate. So
so we have a bunch of functions that say, which allow you to explicitly request time series, right?
Yes.
And rather than the all thing, I mean, don't we have functions? Okay, so what does all mean? Okay, so there's all and there's time series. And there might also be an interpolating function as a function of temperature or something, right?
Yes.
And what is this
No, sorry, I don't think that's quite right. Okay. Yes, we might have time series, but the time series are made up from individual data points. And then if the thing is an interpolating function on its own, then it's typically itself a property value.
I get it.
Okay. Good.
But don't you think that we would ever synthesize an interpolating function from values?
Yes. The framework supports returning any kind of structure that you would like. So, and the simplest version is you just have those disconnected qualified values. But you could choose to include a new structure like a qualified value array, that handles interpolation or that allows you to specify how to interpolate between values.
Why isn't that just an interpolating function? Why don't we just return just like we return a time series? Why not just return an interpolating function? Or, I mean, and alternatively,
I think we could do this, but we shouldn't do it by default because interpolating functions make too strong assumptions about when you can interpolate, what is continuous, what's not continuous.
For sure. Well, as a time series does. I mean, a time series, I think it's the same story. I mean, there are things where it's reasonable to do that, and there are things where it isn't reasonable to do that.
Right.
But I think we should make that decision. And well, whatever. Okay. So, what is this qualified value thing?
Yeah. So we have those two complementary symbols, or at least that's a proposal, that on the input, we have a qualifier selector where we either give explicit values or a range specification like all. And then the return value, if the value is uniquely determined, then it's just a value. But if you say, for instance, give me for all available temperature, and that can be interpreted depending on the implementation, then we need to qualify all of the possible values, and that's the qualified value.
And we are well aware there are issues with this. Like the advantage is it is a nice construct to have really meta information around something. The disadvantage is it is not immediately usable.
Well, normal would make it usable. I mean, but the problem is, for each one of these, there's kind of in the case of the temperature dependence, right. I mean, okay, so basically what will come out is a function of some kind. Okay, hold on. So let's look at this from several angles.
But as Tony earlier said, it might be totally categorical. There's no reason to assume we only speak about numbers.
Yes, I realize that. Yeah, I realize that. Hold on 1 second here. Okay. Okay. So, but you're saying, so that could be an association. I mean, it could end up, there are different forms. You could want a categorical thing with tagged with something as an association. You could want, you could want a variety of things. Let's see. But okay. Also, there's the question of when you say temperature arrow all, what kind of a thing is that temperature?
That's a so-called qualifier. And each property can define their own qualifiers. For instance, we can look at an example here. For instance, the heart as an anatomical structure has a mass. Yeah? And we can look up qualifiers of the mass property and its, statistical group. And then we can look up the possible categorical values of that qualifier. Yeah? And then we can request for those different statistical groups the masses of the heart.
But what if there was a distribution of masses that we could get out? That would be a different attribute or a different qualifier or what?
I think if directly a distribution would come out, it would be a own property. I don't think we assemble it on the fly.
Okay. But is it a property or is it an attribute? Because some of these things, it's like, you ask for the temperatures and then you say, give me the mean temperature. That's an attribute in the entity property value system.
Yes. So there are two questions. One is, does the framework support it? And yes, the framework is very general. It supports all of those cases. The other question is, how do we model that ontologically? Yeah. So in general, the idea of qualifiers is that a property that supports qualifiers is basically a function with named arguments, where those arguments are the qualifiers.
Well, but look, if I say I want the mass of such and such, or the electrical resistivity of such and such a thing at 200 kelvins, right?
Yeah.
But actually, I'd be happy with the nearest, with the value we have for the nearest temperature to 200 kelvins.
Yes.
Right? How do I get that?
So that can be implemented in the entity framework, and I have implemented such an example where you can choose, do you want to interpolate or take the nearest value? No? Because it's a function, you can do whatever you like.
Okay, but that's some kind of attribute, like taking the mean value, right? Taking, across all the values, I could just want the mean, I could want the maximum, I could want the minimum, I could want the statistical distribution, etc. Right? And to me, that's what we've usually referred to as an attribute. Entity property value and then attribute. Isn't that right? I mean, like when we ask for temperatures, for what am I trying to say? For
cities, like min, max, mean.
Yes. How do we get those? Those are right now in weather data. We're requesting city, the attribute temperature, whatever it is. And then we're requesting as the third argument, don't we request the, which attribute of that we get? Isn't that correct?
Well, that's an annotation.
But, annotation. I'm sorry, I used the wrong term.
Annotations are basically just other properties. It's just a syntactic word to introduce another named property. But theoretically, it's just a new property.
What's the difference in that and a qualifier of a property?
Qualifiers are, in some sense, properties of a property. Yeah? So a property.
Well, what's the difference? What is an annotation if it isn't also a property of a property?
So, for instance, you can say population as a property has a certain value, or you can say population, date to know what the date of that population value refers to. But you could model it differently in saying population date, just a single property name that gives the date corresponding to the.
But look. You've got these annotations, which are these things where what am I trying to say? You've got these things where you say temperature, arrow, whatever. Now, there also is an annotation version of that which says at what temperature was this measured. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
Right? Right. So that's an annotation. But so this qualifier, is it using the same language as the you know, is it using the same language as the qualifiers?
It's rather that for a given qualifier, it can have a certain default qualifier value. And that means that, for instance, for the population, if you don't specify qualifier, then it's the latest state.
Okay.
And that default qualifier value can be stored and retrieved.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I finally made it out of the woods, as they say.
Yes, we hear some signs of civilization in the background.
Right. So now I just have to figure out where I am, and then I'm in good shape. Hold on, just 1 second here. Excuse me. The good news is I'm able to do the meeting. The bad news is I have no idea where I am. I see. Oh, fascinating. Okay. Okay, good. Okay. Right. Let's see. Okay, keep going. So sorry. All right. So the language. So given an entity, there is a question: what qualifiers does it support? That's first question, right? Given an entity, you know, it's like entity qualifiers.
Yeah,
would be. It's like entity properties would be the properties that the entity has, and entity qualifiers would be the qualifiers that the entity has. Is that right?
It's rather one level more indirect. First, one asks what properties does that entity have, and later one asks for each property, what qualifiers does it have?
Really? But it comes down to what Stephen said after the earlier discussion.
Yes, basically the entity has the union of all the property qualifiers.
Yeah. Okay, so fine. So it has the entity, there is a notion of entity qualifiers, and there's a notion of entity property qualifiers, correct?
Yes, ontologically, semantically, right now, we don't have formally the version of entity qualifiers.
So what do? Do you say qualifiers of an entity?
This is the step that we currently don't have, is what I'm saying.
I see. Okay. So let me see. So hold on 1 second. I just need to figure out where I am. This is it's rather embarrassing. This was a consequence of having a meeting set that I thought was in between one meeting that I was having and another meeting. And so I thought that I had ample time, that if I went out in a particular direction, that I would have a whole meeting's worth of time to go back. But my other meeting was cancelled and I didn't know it. So, okay, so what? Okay, all right, keep going here. So, okay, so then we've got a notion of, so we've got this notion of qualifiers. Okay, so for any given entity, there's a list of all its qualifiers, which are what? Are they strings or are they some kind of entity qualifier object or property qualifier object?
So they are strings. traditionally.
But I think they should have some kind of properly encrusted version as well.
Yes. So originally we had, and we still have, the idea that we have an entity property which has a type name and a property name and potentially some qualifier. That means the type is a string and the property is a string, and the qualifier is also a string, but they all encapsulated in the entity property. And the proposal is that we liberate those qualifiers from the notion of an entity property and make them available to other things which are not entity properties.
Like entities or like qualifier.
Yes, to entities or external identifiers.
Okay. The problem with a pure naked string is very hard to document. And, you know, I mean, I can see that we can align, like we should also something which isn't just a string.
Yes, so in some sense they can be seen as properties, and in Wikidata that's already the case. So the Wikidata qualifiers are all full properties.
What do you mean they're properties? The qualifier, like temperature, is a property? No, it's something different. It's an entity property. Look, temperature is not, the temperature of tungsten isn't a meaningful property, right?
Right.
It's a different kind of thing. So it shouldn't be tagged as a property. It should be tagged as a qualifier. Right? I mean, it could be tagged as a property qualifier or just a qualifier.
But Stephen, in your example, it's a little bit taken out of context.
Okay. Explain.
You put two random things, tungsten and temperature, together. There's of course no reason that they would fit together.
No, I understand that, but I want to specify tungsten at a temperature of 3,000 degrees. What's its resistivity?
So one can see those qualifiers as properties of a statement.
You mean the statement, what is its resistivity?
Yes. And the property of that statement is such and such temperature.
No, I don't like this.
Yeah, I think it's horrible. I think that's a sparkleism.
No, I feel like there are a handful of qualifiers that apply very generically. Like you have a thing, you can say when you have it, so which we have under control with stated. We could in principle say where you have it, like Indeed. If it's a movable object, which we principally have geoposition to say it is there, but we don't have basically the equivalent of dated where the second argument would be a geoposition. And then there are a handful of other ones. How much of it, like it's a food or a substance. And then temperature would be another one in this kind of, and another one would be maybe shape. You know, I feel like a handful of very general ones.
No, I agree. I mean, these are, you know, in the physics version of this, how do we think about these? That is, I mean, what is our way of understanding what's going on from a kind of you know, sort of a physics point of view about this? Like space and time, we kind of understand those are a thing in physics, but you know, it's less obvious. Something like shape is certainly not a thing in physics, so to speak. Right. Temperature is a thing in physics and a base unit and all that kind of thing.
I mean, this also depends on the entity. If the entity is very material and unique, like a city, many of them don't make sense. Like you cannot change the shape because it comes with the entity. But if the entity is a more abstractum object like gold, then this the shape becomes a possible one.
Well, okay, right. So, and similarly, time, like gold, unless it's early in the history of the universe where its isotopic abundances were different, but that's very obscure. In a first approximation, it's time invariant.
Right.
I mean, just like you can't say I want, 25 kilograms of New York. So, I mean, the basic point is...
But while no property depends on it, it might still be a sensible fact to state that a certain amount of gold was at a certain time at a certain place on Earth. It's still a sensible statement to make.
Okay, but statement is different from... Okay, so let's distinguish those things.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're talking about is... one thing is generically 1 kilogram of gold. And the other thing is more the assertion, the kilogram of gold that is at this position, that is in the Federal Reserve, the Bank of New York or something, whatever it is. Is that
also, I feel like the kilogram is also some kind of assertion.
What do you mean?
There's also the assertion that there is one.
Well, you mean if I said of Lawrencium or something for which no kilogram has never been produced?
Right. It's still an assertion that you make.
Yeah.
I mean, they're slightly different, but I feel like there's not such a big difference between the two.
I don't agree with you. I think that the statement that, because the properties of a kilogram of Lawrencium are presumably computable in some way. What am I trying to say? It feels different from
I agree, but there even something like the weight. The weight would depend where you are.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Well, that's interesting. I mean, we don't probably have a weight property for things. We only have a mass property, I suspect.
Correct. Yes. I mean, that would be the same.
In the isotopic abundance of gold, 50 years. What's that?
Tony, maybe once we are at this topic, scroll to the quantified part. Like for chemistry, this quantification is, of course, a very important part.
It's a pity that the word quantifier has been used in for all there exists and so on.
Tarski's fault.
Yes. That's a bit confusing to say.
I mean, we had long discussions about this, like the one that we use internally in Wolfram Alpha is quantity of, which is very descriptive, but not our typical naming convention.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, quantified is a little bit weird, but let's okay. Well, let's not obsess about the name right now. But basically, the point is, this is a way of saying. Now, we discussed this like several years ago. I mean, the whole. I thought we had entity. I mean, just like in the family of entity group, don't we have an entity? What do we have right now?
We have implemented entity instance allows to do this job right now. But we were thinking if we really want to go into chemistry and make chemistry reasonable, accessible, and natural, then having an entity instance of something with a certain molarity, having an entity instance of this in a certain amount will feel not very natural.
Well, but what's the alternative here? I don't understand. Why is it entity instance? I mean, you don't like the name, or is it you don't like the concept?
So for me, it was the name has the problem that
okay, don't worry about the name.
So for a lot of the cases,
yeah.
So if the first argument is not an entity, if the first argument is a molecule or some other object, then that was my only reason for.
Okay. I mean, I mean, we could call it like quantity instance or something. That's not quite right either, but we can come up with a name. Like quantified is not going to work.
No, we did think so. It was just a nice parallel to qualified.
Right. I mean, you know, there's conceivably qualified instance, quantified instance, or quantity instance. I'm not sure. Quantified instance is better than quantified. Okay, so in any case, I mean, let's imagine it's quantified instance for now. Okay, so I don't know what chemical solution means, but that's a
solution in the sense of acid.
I know what it is.
Okay.
I know what it is. I mean, I didn't mean I don't know what it is. I mean, I don't know how we, you know, that will have some complicated story about how much water, how much,
Yes.
you know, hydrochloric acid, et cetera, et cetera,
Yes,
et cetera.
yes.
So I doubt it's just going to look like that. And I also think there's some very interesting associativity properties of, you know, a chemical solution of chemical solutions, so to speak.
But going back, like what you just, at least your first of your objection is taken care of. Like we have the abstractum of a solution of HCl in water, and then the quantification through the molarity would uniquely specify the ratios.
What if there were three? That molarity has to be specific to the substance.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So you would, if you have a multiple solution, you would have to have a molarity specification for each component.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. In general, I mean, it's not.
But it would be easy to just make the second argument list
Of chemical solution.
Yeah.
I agree, but reaching in from the outside and saying it's such and such a molarity is basically just a convenience, because if the solution has three components, it's going to give an error. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then, all right. So we have qualified instance and quantified instance in conceptually, where qualified instance means it's a little weird. I mean, so, okay, right now we have entity instance. An entity instance tries to handle both of those things, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you want to break them apart because you want to put things other than entities in the first argument. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, we could just call it instance. And, but I mean,
wouldn't
so
operate very nicely with find instance.
Well, fair enough. Okay. Okay, well, whatever. I mean, but the basic point is that what you want to do is you want to have, just like with entity instance, you have a grab bag of things that qualify its properties, or, you know, if it's something like a chemical solution, they reach in and specify options to that thing. I mean, it's a little bit like show.
Yeah,
is that a fair?
Yes. Yeah, I think
analogy?
that's very fair. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, instanced. Well, I think that sounds like too much like object-oriented programming, but basically what we're saying is, I mean, then it could be axiomatic that anything you can do with this outer wrapper, you could also insert into the objects themselves. Is that a true statement, or is that not a true statement? It's not a true statement for an entity, is it?
What's good? Not right now for entities.
Okay. So for entities, it's always still the wrapper is outside it. An entity instance wrapper is outside it.
Or yeah, or the yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, we could imagine that that's what. Okay, so then this show-like construct can put. Okay, why do we want the show-like construct? What is the point of it? So for each thing, we also have like entity. Okay, we have entity instance. We could potentially have property instance, right? That is the analog of qualified. But what you're saying is, so property instance could have whatever. Okay. Let's zoom out a little bit. So dated has been very nice.
Yeah,
I think. So what we want to do is generalize the success of dated. But dated is in a sense unnecessary because everything you can do with dated, you can do with annotations. Right?
Yep.
Now, the thing I'm not clear with dated is,
maybe with the
it's sort of a hack.
So we made it with the exception of some of the dated units, but
what does that mean? What dated units? I mean, so dated, comma, all has this hack that it returns a time series, right?
yeah, no, I mean a dollar from 1980, which isn't the entity.
I see.
But mostly entities is still a correct statement.
Okay, but okay, the dated, comma, all hack, which is highly useful. Right, let's talk about that and its generalization. Because can I say, I can't say dated, comma, mean, or, I could say dated, comma, all, and it gives a time series, right? So similarly, if I'm saying, I don't know, qualified, well, see, look, if I want it as a function of temperature, density as a function of temperature, I would say something like qualified, density, comma, what am I doing there? How am I doing that? I'm saying something like, how am I saying that? As a function of temperature. I want the density as a function of temperature.
And you want it as interpolating function rather than as a long list of values.
I could take either of them, but I just want to know how I get it at all. Do you see?
Yeah, it's up to the designer of that density property to decide what the possible right-hand sides are.
No, we've got to have a standardization of that.
Yeah, for instance, one approach would be if we say all, then in the case of categorical values, then the choice is clear, all of them. And in the case of an infinite set of possible values, sample some entity.
Well, I don't necessarily agree. I mean, I think even in the case, look, we can make a decision. Okay, time series. What we don't have, an interpolating function, unlike, okay, a time series has this notion of dateless plot to plot it. And we can say mean of a time series. We can't say mean of an interpolating function. It's a different kind of thing. I mean, we could invent a thing which is like a time series, but it's not as a function of time. It's as a function of some other property, right? So we can imagine something where we say, just like we have all kinds of things for dealing with time series, duration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we could imagine something where it is as a function of some other essentially physical property, position, temperature, whatever else.
Yes.
Am I making sense?
Yeah. But it wouldn't be so much different from an interpolating function de facto.
No, it's not so different, but it has the feature. I agree. And we might be able to, do it in terms of an interpolating function. I'm not sure.
It's a little bit like quantity array, an array of quantities.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Okay, so, all right. So let's come back again to how you select out. So, I mean, there's two things. I want to select the value for tungsten at temperature, whatever. and I want to get the results as a function of temperature. How do I get those two things? Knowing that in most cases, the data we have will be incomplete with respect to, you know, do you get what I'm saying?
I think so.
So there could be two possible ways. Either you have, say, 100 explicit values and you just want to get them, or you have a computation and you want to compute and get it in maybe an interpolating function for a certain range of temperatures.
Yes.
Then the question is, how do you specify that other than all? It could be a span or something more sophisticated.
Right, right. So what have we done with historical countries? You know, that's still an unsolved thing. We say there's this country and we want to get its border in 1652. Okay. And I think we have a mechanism. And is there anybody here who knows about that? Is Alan here?
Yeah, I'm here. I mean, we've just been using dated to specify that on whatever the property is. I mean, dated of polygon, whatever the year is.
I see. And so we don't have a mechanism for a span of years. We don't have any notion of a geo interpolation. I mean, so like time series is an interpolation of a value as, I mean, so I think with
we have a set of discrete polygons for some set of years while that country was in existence, but no notion of interpolating those things.
Okay. So, I mean, and then also coming with geostatistics will probably be an ability to interpolate spatially, as in we know the density of foxes, you know, in this region or something, we can interpolate something about that. Or I don't know. I don't even know whether these things, you know, sometimes they'll be valid, sometimes they won't. Okay. Okay, so you're saying, all right, so let's go back again to, all right, so there is qualified that, I mean, so first of all, how do you do the discovery to get a map of what's there? So given an entity, I want to know, well, given an entity and a property, I guess, I want to know what are all the qualifications, what are all the places for which we have values with respect to all the qualifiers there. Do you understand the question?
Yep. Tony is typing it.
Yes, so we have the concept of properties, and one of them is the qualifiers that are applicable to a certain property.
Okay. All right, but now what do I know, for example, for gender there? No, that's bad choice, but I mean, you know, it's like, what can I choose there? See what I'm saying?
Yes, for the categorical qualifiers, you can get a list. For the non-categorical, there's at the moment no clear indication of what you can do. For instance, for a date, you might be able to give an interval or a date interval.
Yeah, I think an interval is the right thing. Fair enough. Okay, so then here, qualifier values. Humph. Wow. I mean, I don't like the fact that these are so many naked strings. Especially when some of these things, I mean, there where it says, you know, Mexican, Nicaraguan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
You want them, sorry, I'm not quite sure in which direction. Do you want them to be wrapped in something like qualifier value, or do you want them to be on its own entities?
Well, I'm thinking closer to entities.
I see.
But they might be wrong. I mean, you know, an entity which is the qualifier value of whatever. I mean, that might be the wrong idea. I just think that this is
the right
okay. So then, go ahead.
The right-hand side is not constrained by what it has to be. They can be entities. Yeah. So that was a data modeling choice and not a framework choice. The framework supports having entities here instead of those strings. Yeah?
Okay, but so what if I want to say middle school, middle age, or preschool? If I want to say, do I have a whole syntax for age of thing, alternatives thing? How does that work? And then how do I distinguish whether I want the list of results or the aggregate of the results?
Yes, so at the moment that would work as you would take the age. You would basically construct different properties.
Yeah.
And then you have some entity of those.
But so you can't, there isn't a syntax that says age, arrow, middle age, vertical bar, school age.
Yes, and the syntax hasn't been really necessary yet because you can expand it out into separate properties.
No, but you can, but you may not want to. I mean, in other words,
yeah.
And so how does this relate to the entity querying mechanism? I mean, where we say, entity, city, comma, population arrow take largest. How does it relate to that?
Yes, so one could say, somehow my typing loses focus now and then, sorry. So that's a class of the largest populations now, but you could say dated in 1950. Yeah.
Does that work now?
In principle, yes, we could check. And that works also with, so practically it does not at the moment.
Okay, why is that? Fast. Why is that? I mean, why does that not? I don't understand. Isn't that doing a database query?
There is, I don't think that particular query is translated to an efficient query on the other side at the moment.
Okay, so we should fix that.
That's a bug.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's not a horrible syntax. I mean, city, dated, population, arrow, take largest 3. That's perfectly reasonable.
It's definitely clear what it means.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the analog of that? If I say, okay, all right. So for example, let's say I wanted to get the 3 highest temperatures for which the density of tungsten has been measured. So in other words, if I were to say entity, see, this is what's so weird here. So I've got an entity, and then I am qualifying that entity, not inside the entity, like this, but somehow outside as an entity instance.
Yes, so I can't think of a syntax at the moment for that particular question. Yeah. Because it's the values that you put into the qualifier. Yeah. It's basically asking what are all possible values that a function can take.
Yeah.
It's basically asking for the domain, in some sense.
Well, in an association, that will be values. I mean, insofar as an association is a discrete function. And, clearly, there should be a way to get out. In the case of this population versus age, there should be a way to get out an association that says adult arrow, whatever, middle age arrow, whatever, and so on. Now, one of the tricky things in that particular example is the total of all those is an overcounting, right? Because those categories are not mutually exclusive. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
So sometimes they will be mutually exclusive and sometimes they will not. And for example, knowing that fact might be yet another qualifier of a qualifier, so to speak.
Yes. So when those qualifier values are entities, yeah, they can have all the relations necessary to determine which ones are orthogonal to each other and which ones just rotate the reference frame.
So quick remark, Alan and I will have to go to another meeting in 4 minutes.
Okay. Are we at time for this meeting in 4 minutes? I'm sorry, I'm just not.
Yeah, it's 4 minutes before 1.
Okay. Well, this should clearly be continued. Let's set up another one of these. I mean, can we try to set up another one this week so that we haven't forgotten everything that's going on? And of course, I wasn't able to look at the comments on the live stream. I don't know if there are
I will
a whole
write
bunch
to
of
Emma.
comments. Well, wait a second. Okay, but were there interesting comments on this live stream that are worth bringing out here?
I didn't follow it actually.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, sorry to everybody there. When the next meeting, we'll be paying full attention. Maybe we'll be able to address this at the tail end of this. I'll be back in a minute. What a goof up. Okay. All right. So then, okay. So did you have a summary where you had written down what all the proposed structures actually are? So you've got.
It's basically the
qualified value, and quantified. So those are the 3 things you're proposing.
Yes, and the qualified could also be called Qualifier Selector or.
Right. Yeah. There's more work to be done on this. I mean, let's just understand. I mean, the scenarios. Okay. I mean, just like there's dated, there's sort of geo-placed is another concept that we could imagine.
Yes.
What else could we imagine that is a similar generic wrapper? I mean, there's a physical amount.
Yeah, heat, as we had earlier, heated, what temperature it is, shaped.
Why are you so obsessed with shaped? Is that for food? I mean, when does shape...
Partially, no, actually it goes back to you. You were in the early alpha years, you always wanted like falling speed of various shaped objects in liquids.
I see. Okay, fine. But I mean, the problem is now that we have a whole computational geometry system, shaped, it's like, I don't really quite get the shaped one, because I think that we either are describing it qualitatively of it's roughly a capsule shape or something, or we're describing it quantitatively in terms of region objects and things.
Yes, I agree, but we still need basically something where we stick this region in. Given a region that describes the shape, how do we associate it with the piece?
Okay, well, I think you guys need to go, but we should continue this. And but please, let's continue it before we've kind of forgotten what's going on here.
Yep. Okay.
For people following this live stream, we will be continuing with the live stream about a slightly different topic, but maybe at the beginning of that one, we'll try and look at a few comments from this one that we haven't been able to address here. Let's see. I mean, anything else we need to cover right now, right here?
I don't think so.
Nope.
Thank you.
Okay, let's wrap this up, and we'll be back on a different live stream soon. Okay, see you all soon.